What's going on, guys? Today we are talking about, can you build fat and burn muscle? Let's rewind that. Can you build muscle and burn fat at the same time? Let's get into it. Now, generally speaking, there are two major groups of people who keep asking about building muscle, burning fat at the same time. First one, skinny fat, right? Where you want to get bigger, you want to get more mass, but you also want to get a little bit more cut-ski, you want to get a six-pack Johnny bag of donuts looking good on the beach. And then the other group is they want to build a bigger butt, and they also want to get leaner, they want to get more defined. Because right now, big butts are everything. So everyone wants to get a bigger butt, but they also want to get leaner. So those are the two major groups, but realistically, everybody wants to build more muscle and burn more fat at the same time. It's like the ultimate goal. Can you do it? That is like the ultimate question. Can you build more muscle and burn fat at the same time? And the answer is twofold. On one hand, and in a very overly simplistic way, no, you cannot. But please keep watching, because the answer gets better and more in your favor. In the short term, no, you can't. And what most people who argue this, they'll say, well, here is the deal. If you look at the research, clearly you need to be in a calorie deficit to burn fat and a calorie surplus to build muscle. So herefore too, you cannot build muscle, burn fat at the same time. Technically, they're right. Because to burn fat, you need to be in a calorie deficit, and to build muscle, you need to be in a calorie surplus. So in any 24-hour time span, no, you can't do both at the same time. Fortunately, nobody's expecting to get jacked in a day or to get shredded in a day. And if you are, then your perspective is completely fucked. So I can't fix that. But if you realize that you're looking to make goals over the course of 6 months, a year, 5 years, of course you can build muscle and burn fat at the same time. Not only can you, you should be doing that. And I want to discuss how. Now, there are generally two ways. The first way is through cutting and bulking cycles. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The other way is through what's called body recomposition, and I'll discuss that afterwards. Just keeping in mind, body recomposition is what the ultimate goal is. But most people would do better to start with cutting and bulking cycles, because the reality is, body recomposition is when you have enough experience and enough patience to know that progress isn't going to happen really in any week or month time frame, that it takes a really long time. So first, looking at cutting and bulking cycles, one of the major questions, especially from the more like the skinny fat crowd, is, well, what if I want to do both? What do I start with? Do I start with a cut, or do I start with a bulk? For me, the best answer usually lies in starting with a cut. Reason being, once you start bulking, there will be fat gain along the way. It doesn't have to be a ton. And a lot of people get scared hearing that. Like, they don't want to add any fat ever. Like, God forbid fat comes on. But when you start with a cut, you get as lean as you can first, and then you have more leeway, because during a bulk, you're going to add fat. And being scared of that is only going to prevent you from ever getting that body that you want, from adding more muscle, from really getting stronger and bigger. So it's really important to remember, adding more fat is not a bad thing. Not to mention, once you really learn how to cut properly, all of a sudden bulking becomes much more fun, because you know exactly what you have to do to lose the fat again. And it becomes a much more realistic, much more sustainable, much more enjoyable process. You're not scared of gaining fat because you know exactly what to do to lose it. And by the way, if you're not sure how to lose fat, if you're not sure how to go into a calorie deficit to do that, click the link in my description. I have a full video explaining how to calculate your calorie deficit for a sustainable fat loss phase. So generally speaking, starting with a cut is a really good idea, because you start off getting as lean as you want before you go into the bulking phase. A lot of people ask, how lean should you get? That's up to you. A lot of people always ask, how do you know when to stop the cut? You stop the cut once you've gotten to a point in which either you need a mental break, you've gotten to a point where you're just like, you know you need to stop because like you're mentally just tired of dieting, or you look in the mirror, you're like, you know what, I'm lean enough, I'm ready to start building. That's up to you. Now, how long should a cut last? Generally speaking, if you're already very lean, you're already on a very, very, very lean side of the equation, 4 to 16 weeks. 16 weeks being on the higher end if you're already very lean. If you have a lot to lose, then you can go more than 16 weeks. You can go 20 weeks, you can go 24 weeks. I mean, if you have a lot to lose, some people are cutting for a year. And that's not to say there aren't breaks in between, but generally speaking, You could go for a long period of time, the more you have to lose. But if you're already relatively athletic and a relatively low body fat, 4 to 16 weeks is plenty. Once you reach a level of leanness that you're happy with, or you've gotten to a point in which you know you need a diet break and you don't want to be in a cut anymore, now we switch to the bulk phase. And generally speaking, I think this should be anywhere between 8 to 16 weeks. You could also go 20 depending on how slowly you're adding calories. But I don't like 4 weeks for a bulk because you can't add that much muscle in 4 weeks. Even if you're a beginner, you're just not gonna add that much muscle. So 8 weeks bare minimum, 16 to 20, sometimes 24 weeks. Keeping in mind, the more calories you add, the less time you should be spending in a bulk. Because if you're adding more calories more quickly, then you're gonna be adding more fat more quickly. So that's why I like to add relatively fewer calories. It could be 300 to 500 extra a week. It doesn't have to be that much. And it's going to vary person to person. This is where trial and error really comes into it. But anywhere between 8 to 16, 20 weeks is a really good time frame. So now we have, on a cutting phase, 4 to 16 weeks, and a bulking phase, we have 8 to 16 weeks. You go back and forth, at the end of the year, now you've spent, we could call it 6 months cutting, 6 months bulking, and at the end of the year, you've burned fat and you've built muscle at the same time. And this is where a lot of people, they really let the idea of calorie surplus and calorie deficit trick them. Like, well, you have to be in a surplus to build muscle and you have to be in a deficit to burn fat. So how could you possibly do both at the same time? Because we're not looking at a 24-hour time period. We're looking at the course of 6 months, a year, 5 years. And that's what matters. Now, the body recomposition, this is more like the pinnacle and what ideally everyone will get to. The reason most people don't is because it requires an inordinate amount of patience. I really like starting off beginners and intermediates with more defined cutting and bulking phases because you clearly see your progress over the course of 8, 12, 16 weeks. There's no denying it. Like, there is clear progress there. With a body recomposition phase, it might take you 3 months, 6 months to look back at your initial pictures and to really see that progress. Reason being, you're not having a defined cut phase, you're not having a defined bulk phase, you're doing both more on like a weekly basis. So here's what that looks like. Let's say, for example, you're lifting 4 times a week. Throughout that week, you might have 4 high calorie days, each on your lifting days to use those calories when your body and muscles can use them best, and have 3 days a week in which you're lower calorie on your rest days, and you don't need those calories to fuel your muscle growth. So you have 3 days a week in a slight calorie deficit, 4 days a week in a slight calorie surplus. So at the end of the week, you're relatively close to maintenance, but you're managing your fat gain by not being in a surplus the entire time. And you're also managing your stress, and you're able to stay in this phase for a long time because you're not in a calorie deficit. You're not just constantly dieting and really having to be so meticulous in tracking everything, which is where a lot of people, that's the major issue with fat loss phases and cutting, is after a certain point, you just get tired of it. So sort of by having both benefits within a week time frame, you get the best of both worlds. Again, the issue is you're not gonna see such quick results one way or another. You really have to be patient with this and sort of just sit in, look for the long haul and say, hey, for 6 months, I'm just gonna hit this consistently. So when you look back at your pictures from 6 months at the beginning to 6 months to now, you can really see, okay, wow, like my shoulders have really come in, my glutes have really come in, I've leaned out here, I'm wearing 1 or 2 sizes smaller clothing, but throughout that process, every month, you might not have been seeing it as quickly as if you had been doing defined cutting and bulking phases. So here's a couple things I really want you to remember going forward and deciding whether or not you're gonna do cutting and bulking or body recomposition. Actually, before I do that, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, it would mean a lot. If you're trying to figure out if you should cut or bulk or do body recomposition, here's what I'll say. If you've never done a cutting or bulking phase, do that. If you aren't at a body fat in which you're happy, if you want to get leaner, start with the cut. If you're already as lean as you wanna get and you just wanna focus on building muscle, start in your bulking phase. As for the body recomposition, I have a feeling that if you're watching this video and you're at the level to be doing a body recomposition, you know it. You're at that point. Everything I've said is not really new to you. There was no really big revelations. You understand this. Maybe the thought of going into a 16-week cut is more anxiety producing than it is actually beneficial. In which case, maybe you need to focus on just sitting in it for the long haul, being patient, and going on a 6-month journey doing the same thing rather than trying to go intense into a cut or intense into a bulk. To wrap it up, again, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you don't already. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. Thank you to Rico for filming. Talk to you soon.